this is something different, I think, that's happening right now. Regardless of what we on the left want to do and what we want the conversation to be about, the conversation about some of these other things keep getting brought up. And my concern is that oftentimes, but brought up by the right opportunistically, I would say, because they know that they can distract from the fact that they offer nothing to working class people of all stripes, including trans working class people, to your point, disproportionately working class. They know that if they bring up a subject like this, they can thread the following needle. For example, maybe you don't see yourself as a bigot, and maybe you don't see yourself as a transphobe, but you see yourself as a free speech warrior. You see yourself as someone who cares deeply about internet censorship. And this has become a polarizing issue, including on the left. Therefore, if you frame the issue as, should someone be banned from Twitter for deadnaming? Not, should you be allowed to deadname? Is it good to deadname? I think everyone is in agreement, obviously, that it's very disrespectful, it's hurtful, it's wrong, it's, I would argue, immoral to do so. The separate question of whether or not the Twitter policy should be something different is separate. In the same way that one might say, I hate Nazis, I hate the KKK, but I respect the ACLU's choice to defend their right to march. What do you make of that, Esperanza?
Well, I think that if people are really concerned about free speech and, big tech infringing on that, then they should be fighting to overthrow the capitalist class in the US rather than attempting to protect hate speech against transgender people. I think that, in union organizing, we use a technique called AAR, right, which is affirm, answer, and redirect. And it's when the organizing conversation begins to get taken into a place where we don't want it. And we simply redirect it back to the core issue. And so if someone's really concerned about free speech, we should be talking about the core issue, which is capitalism and the capitalist class, their dictatorship over literally every aspect of our lives. We should redirect it from a place where it's a moot point, which is around, should we be protecting the so-called rights of people like Jordan Peterson to propagate hate speech on the internet?
What do you think about that, Kim?
My question about that, I suppose, is there an idea then that if we reach this point in society where we could get away from capitalism and have, a fairer society, and to be transparent, I am not for communism. I would say that I'm for a regulated version of capitalism for sure. I know I get characterized on the internet by some people as being a right winger, but I economically am very firmly, I would say, on the left, progressive, for Medicare for all, doing a lot for student debt, eliminating student debt, and doing even more beyond that, actually. Economically, I've always fallen definitely on the left, and many social issues as well. But so there's that. But to think that, if we redirect, so let's say we do that and we say, okay, we're going to just overthrow this capitalistic society. Does that change bigotry? I mean, would that change the conversation at all? I mean, I would imagine that in a communist society, there are still bigots, right? There are still people who are going to, I just don't think that the racism, bigotry, sexism, all that stuff still exists, no matter what the economic structure of society is. So you would still have to battle that at some point in some way. I think the issue that, those of us who do argue on behalf of free speech is because whoever's in power gets to decide what is considered a bigot. And that is problematic for me as somebody that says, I've lived in a very conservative state, grew up in a very conservative state where people on the right were in control. They still are in control of that state. And they would ban certain speech. They would ban certain behavior because they would say that is, that's not allowed. And it was usually they were coming from a position of, because the Bible says so, or because this is what God wants, or they were religious in some way. And so they were able to control the rules. And when they were able to be in charge of the rules, and let's say they were the ones then at the time when Twitter were to be the big thing of the day, then we would be living under, the rules that we'd have to abide by on Twitter would be run by this other group of people. And that's why those of us that fight for not total absolute open free speech. I'm not for that at all. There's consequences to certain speech. Some speech is illegal and for good reason, or some speech you're going to have some consequences to. But for the most part, just having this ability to exchange an idea, the ability to be a bigot, because somebody's bigot is somebody else's hero. It depends on who you are. So I think that's why we focus on that, because that could happen in any economic in any economic society. And it does happen in any economic society.
Yes, Esperanza, what do you make of that? What do you make of the idea that, to give anybody that level of power is dangerous? And so therefore, because they could decide that they might stick their neck out and protect your group, but they might stick their neck out and protect another group. People have been critical of Twitter for having a very inconsistent policy with banning and censoring people, and folks on the left have observed that oftentimes it's leftists who get the crappy end of that particular stick. Who decides, are you going to get banned for the N-word? Are you going to get banned for the K-word or any other racial epithet?
Do you get banned for the N-word on Twitter right now?
I don't actually know.
Well, this is actually, one of the things that I had also wanted to bring up is that, there's actually a problem with Twitter not taking, hate speech seriously, whether it's racist hate speech, or other kinds of hate speech. I recently had a friend pass away. She was in the sex industry, and, there were men calling her, a whore, this and that, and they didn't get banned for that.
Right, exactly.
So, and then, sorry, and I think that there's, it's not simply with Twitter, but there's a broader issue of tech companies not taking hate speech seriously, including Yubo, which did not take the misogynistic hate speech of the Uvalde shooter seriously. And so, again, pretending that, these tech companies are taking it too seriously, when they're actually not taking it seriously at all, and it's resulting in oversight that is leading to these incidents of mass violence. I think it's just a profound misreading of the problem.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that generally speaking, you're concerned that they're by focusing on the issue of banning Jordan Peterson, we're creating a perception that there actually is too much banning on Twitter when in fact there isn't enough. And I would push back and say, I think the argument is that the inconsistency that you describe, where the abuse that your friend suffered wasn't addressed, where the Uvalde shooter was let go through the cracks, while certain other kinds of speech, for example, there have been people who, Facebook was taking down posts that were like, white people are irritating or whatever during 2020, during the George Floyd protest. It seems for some people observe this inconsistency and say, well, if the people who really need to get taken down aren't taken down, and a bunch of people who we might judge as fairly innocuous are being taken down, then I'd rather it be laissez-faire and have no intervention whatsoever by the tech overlords. So the finer pointed question is, do you think we should be putting trust in the tech overlords at all to be making these kind of decisions?
Yeah, well, obviously my answer to that would be no, but the solution to that is not just to ask them to give us free speech. It is to seize power in society and democratically control public goods, public utilities, such as social media sites.
Well, then who decides? Because this is the problem as well, right? We've talked about this on the show, right, Kim? That the Democrats promulgate this czar, this misinformation czar. And there's this idea that there is some finite truth or some objective truth, and the Democrats can get to the bottom of it. And very quickly, it comes out that she had made errors in judgment around censorship of the Hunter Biden tapes, that she herself was demonstrated to not necessarily have been particularly consistent in the judgment that she made. And the question then becomes, I don't say that to say, oh, she's a horrible person and pile on her, but to say that we are all fallible. And do we want anyone, especially at a place like Twitter, where there's so much speech that happens that has so much journalistic significance, even if only 3% of the population is on there, to be picking and choosing who there is? And I appreciate your point about when it would be great if we actually control Twitter. But even if we, whoever that is, there was some democratic control over Twitter, it's not entirely clear to me what decisions would be made and how people would come to decide. Speech law, the history of speech case law, First Amendment case law, is all over the place and has been generated over decades and decades and decades and decades of fine pointed cases over a diversity of subject matter. And we've kind of gotten to like a weird understanding, but it's all very ephemeral at the end of the day. I mean, are you concerned at all that the benevolent leftist Twitter ruler might still make bad decisions?
I'm concerned that hate speech against women, hate speech against transgender people, is going to continue to result in murder and violence against women, against transgender people. And I think that's what we should be concerned about.
I would push back on that a little bit, and I would say that actually the pushback against hate speech is actually causing quite a bit of the violence.
How do you mean? How do you mean, Kim?
I think that when activism reaches a certain point, it starts to aggravate the other side. People that would normally be your ally are now, they become aggravated. The conversation spirals out of control. I think we see that with these, the people are trying to protect certain groups of people, and they say we want to make sure this group of people have these rights, and we're fighting for their rights. But the pendulum swings too far, and it ends up creating a resentment in the rest of the population when somebody who thinks they're on your side, like myself, for example, when, I have never once advocated against any rights for trans folks. In fact, I've been one that says, I don't really care what bathroom anybody uses, use the one you're comfortable using. I don't know why we have to make laws against this. And I'm somebody that's been vocal about that publicly, yet still get labeled a transphobe or any other. And that's not just trans. It's any issue. I mean, I called a racist or, any kind of bigoted name. And it's because if you speak up and say anything, then suddenly those that are the activist class, they will come after you. And if you have any disagreement, they label it hate speech. They then say you're a bigot, and then they come after, right? They come after people. So when you come after people like that over and over and say, no, you're not allowed to say this because this is now my definition of hate speech, or this is my definition of being a bigot, and that's what you are now, and that's what you're engaging in, it causes resentment in this other group that otherwise would be your ally. And then what ends up happening is that resentment builds up and people start to lash out. And that is what I notice, I think, in society, is that most people, I think, would have just dropped the trans issues. I think a lot of people would have just been like, yeah, whatever. I mean, be who you are. But I think that the push to demonize people, to say, no, but you are not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to do that. If you do that or say that, then now you're a bigot, turns people so off that they join in on the other side and say, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, so Glenn makes a version of this argument, and he talks about Martina Navratilova saying something on Twitter and then getting so much blowback that she kind of increasingly went into kind of TERF territory. And
what is a TERF, by the way?
A trans exclusionary radical feminist. I don't know, Esperanza.
What does that even mean?
It's a kind of feminism that feels like transgender women are a threat to quote unquote biological women. Because broadening the definition of what it means to be a woman comes at the expense of certain kind of rights or achievements that have been gained by the feminist movement prior to the inclusion of trans women.
Oh, okay.
Would you say that that's accurate, Esperanza?
So, I mean, essentially, trans exclusionary radical feminism is, like Briahna said, it's a sort of offshoot of radical feminism that believes that the rights of trans people are in, direct formal contradiction with the rights of women, which they consider to be a class. But, just to be fair, Kim, I think that one of the reasons why people were calling you transphobic was because, one, you were attempting to argue for the right to dead name transgender people. And two, because, you speak on trans issues without having necessarily even done basic investigation. For example, arguing on Twitter that if a trans child doesn't ask for puberty blockers, that they're in a phase. You didn't even know what the acronym TERF standed for. And I think that this is a part of a broader problem with political commentary in our country, where there's no rigorous investigation demanded as a prerequisite to speak on issues. And you have people who are influencing public opinion who don't even do basic research. And I think that that's a big problem.
Do you not think that there is an increase in children, young or teens, saying that they feel that they're non-binary or that they feel like they're the other gender? I mean, are we seeing an increase in that? And I guess then the question is that an increase because of because it's a phase? I mean, I do think that teenagers go through phases. I think that's I don't think I need to do too much more research on that to know that. I think most of us know that teenagers go through phases. What they then choose to make their phase tends to be the fad of the era. That is how it is. It doesn't diminish or it doesn't diminish the fact that that whatever it is they're latching on to exists and is a reality for certain groups of people. It just means that they're saying, oh, okay, well, that's me now. That's what I feel like. I'm maybe, and it could be any number of things or any number of things that they want to try out or any number of things they want to do. So I don't know, certainly I guess there would be a question on, is there an increase in kids coming out and saying to their parents, I'm feeling a certain way? Is there an increase of that because the society's more open, or is it, and so they feel like they can say things? And I know that's been an argument in the past for example, about whether or not somebody if they feel like they can come out as gay or something. Or is that, or do you think that there's some influence in society? And I think that is where, what I was coming from. But to be labeled a transphobe for expressing an opinion, I think is my ultimate and, overall problem and what I'm saying about the activist group that constantly then goes after people and says, well, now you're a bigot because you asked a question or because you have a thought. I can disagree with somebody. And this is what kind of the overall problem I had with with that segment going viral and people then calling me names, is that we've reached a point in society, and it's not new. This is happening. It's new. It's newer on the left. It used to happen a lot on the right. But we've reached a point where, if you question anything, if you just say, look, I don't agree, suddenly I'm a bigot. But why can't I not be a bigot and not agree with you?
Well, and I want to say too that, we could discuss the reasons why, for example, younger adults are more likely than older adults to identify as transgender. We could discuss those trends, but there needs to be a level of rigor, a level of scientific rigor that is demanded of people who have platforms, who are influencing public opinion. Otherwise, these conversations are just going to be like a sheet that you hold up in the wind, and whichever the way the wind blows, your opinion is going to be influenced. And that could be extremely harmful, especially when you're talking about a group such as transgender people who are disproportionately discriminated against, harassed, and, killed in our society. And again, that's why I think, let's not be juvenile here. I get hate all the time on Twitter, but we can't pretend like that's the reason that, violence against transgender people exists. I mean, the state has repressed transgender people and gender variant, gender diverse people since before the trans movement ever arose. So, historically speaking, that just simply cannot be the reason for anti-trans violence, right? Because it existed before the activist movement did.
Well, let me see if I can tease out a couple of things here. So I think that everyone receives hate online for various things, but I will say this: I've had like claims that I'm anti-Semitic pile-ons 2 or 3 times in the last year. My crime being, in one instance, interviewing a young woman who went undercover, wrote a book about going undercover and dating Nazis to find out more about them and basically dox them. And she was frustrated with the way the interview was going and ended the interview abruptly. And then when I posted it anyway, telling her that she would either finish it, but I was going to have to post it, she made all these claims about me on the internet. I've had conversations with Norm Finkelstein about his attitude to discussing Holocaust denial. And although both of his parents were Holocaust survivors, he feels very strongly that people need to discuss Holocaust denial and not just ignore it, because if you ignore it, it has an opportunity to fester in the world, and people have had problems with those kinds of discussions, and on and on and on. But I will say, despite me having a desire to, like, it comes up frequently, these transitions, I always cringe and kind of don't want to talk about it, because I do feel like there's a sensitivity there, and maybe it's a warranted sensitivity. I'm not complaining here, but there does seem to be a little bit of a sensitivity that's out of step with my experiences with accusations of racism or anti-Semitism. And look, my stance on, let's say, racism, since that's my wheelhouse, is I might make a generalized statement. I have in the past and other times in my life said things like, yeah, well, we live in a racist society. Everybody's a little bit racist. Everybody's racist. But I tend to be very careful about actually calling individuals racist, because I know that it can be a little bit of a boy who cries wolf situation. And I know that my credibility hinges on me making accurate assessments of what is and isn't racism. And so one of the things that I often argue is that when people talk about Donald Trump as a racist, they should be very specific. They should avoid examples like the Mexicans aren't sending their Mexico isn't sending their best, because to people who aren't inclined to see him as a racist, they see that as an obvious statement. Yeah, of course, people who are so precarious that they're risking a dangerous border crossing are not, quote unquote, the best, whatever that means, as economically advantaged, as educated, as whatever it is. And when you could then call him racist for that, your credibility in calling things that are actually racist diminished. So I completely agree with your point about needing to be more informed. I often feel very ill-informed in this space. And sometimes on the Hill, I think the way it's structured, topics are thrown at us that we don't always know the most about. And that's kind of a problem in the broader media ecosystem and the 7-minute clips and all of this stuff. But do you think there's something else going on here, where there seems to be perhaps a sensitivity, a more narrow policing of what it means to be kind of in compliance as not transphobic than in some of the other phobias, where Kim, let's say, saying, defending, saying that Twitter shouldn't ban people for dead naming folks, while not dead naming folks herself and saying that she would never dead name folks herself, is kind of collapsed with someone like Jordan Peterson, who is, I would argue, very fairly described as a bigot, who intentionally was dead naming Elliot Page because he wants to be hurtful to him, et cetera. Like, do you think there's some danger in collapsing someone like Kim, even if you disagree with her stance on issues, and someone like Jordan Peterson?
Well, first, I just have to address the example that you made, because, I just want to say that I think the example of Donald Trump saying, Mexico doesn't send its best and what people might think. I think that if you are, willing to risk your life in order to make a better life for yourself and your children, then you are the best in
Right, of
whatever
course. I'm
comparison. I know,
obviously,
but I
I'm
just have to
obviously
say
trying
that.
to,
I understand.
and I appreciate you saying that, but
But
it's that kind of, I don't know, it's frustrating, because this is why it's so difficult to have these conversations, especially in a 7-minute, little 10-minute internet clip. And that's why I really appreciate you both being here and having this show. But it is frustrating, because there is sometimes it feels like no good faith understanding that I am who I am, and I've said what I've said, and my beliefs are what they are, to be able to have some of the difficult conversations. Like, how is the right? How are conservatives understanding language? What are they hearing without it being attributed to one's own belief? And I think that's a little bit of what happened to Kim, right? Her saying Jordan Peterson, shouldn't be banned on Twitter is not the same thing as saying that I agree with what Jordan Peterson is saying or would adopt the same language practices.
yeah, I mean, I just, again, that's just simply not a concern to me. I mean, to be honest, if you are arguing for the right to dead name trans people, I really don't care if you're being
But is
labeled
that
a
what's being
transphobe on
done,
the internet.
Esperanza?
Well, I
Is
mean,
Kim arguing for the right to dead name people, or
well,
arguing against Twitter's ability to censor people for doing so?
well, I mean, arguing against Twitter's ability to censor people from dead naming people is arguing for the right to dead name people. I mean, it's just
On Twitter,
semantics at this
yeah,
point.
I don't know, but the attribution there is that Kim wants to dead name people,
Oh
right?
no,
There's a
I'm not
difference, right?
concerned with personal intent. I mean, whether or not you or Kim or me or anybody wants to dead name someone is not my concern. I don't care about intention. I'm saying the ability to dead name someone on a social media platform um if you argue that we should be able to do that, then yes, you're arguing for the right to dead name people. And again, I think that in a world where transgender people are disproportionately murdered, we're cut out from the formal economy, we face housing discrimination, violence, in all forms. I mean, why are we worried about the right of someone like Jordan Peterson to dead name people? There are broader issues that we should be concerned with.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you make of that, Kim?
I would say that in order to have the rights you seek, you need my help. That's the bottom line. You need my help. You need Briahna's help. You need Jordan Peterson's help. You need everybody's help because you're in a minority group. And so being in a minority group, you cannot obtain that right yourself without the help of people who are not in your group. So I think my overall problem, and not just with this particular issue, but all issues in general where people get labeled a slur, is that those people you're labeling are the very people you need in order to gain this right. This is how, in order for the civil rights movement to have happened, Black people needed the help of white people. That's just the way it is. So if you were a Black person during that time, it wouldn't be wise to go around to every white person and say, you're privileged, you are, and make enemies, right? To like call them names and to make enemies of them when you need their help. So I would caution, I would say, any activist movement and say, try your best not to turn the people you absolutely need, and that is not even negotiable. You need my help. Don't piss us off to the level where we just say, I don't care anymore about you. And I think that's what happens. And that's what I mean. Yeah.
Go ahead,
Well,
Esperanza.
so first of all, I have to say that you weren't being labeled a slur. Transphobe is not a slur.
How's that not a slur? That sounds like a slur to me.
Well, what does it mean
It's
to you,
actually-
Esperanza?
It's actually incredibly juvenile to say that transphobe is a slur. But secondly, we don't actually need you, Kim. You could disappear from the world tomorrow, and the trans movement will still continue. So let's not overstate your importance.
I'm not talking about me
but
personally.
I
I was
also wanna
talking
say
about
that
me
trans
as a group that's
people-
not trans.
Trans people, trans workers are not part of the minority. We are workers. We're part of the working class, and the particularities of our oppression might be slightly different from the particularities of other kinds of workers. But at the end of the day, we all face exploitation, we all face oppression, and we are stronger together when we unite together. And therefore, it's in the best interest of all oppressed and exploited people to unite against our common enemies. And we don't need people who are attempting to divide us around these weird issues, like should we have the right to dead name trans people? We need to get serious about the real crisis that we're in. And that means not being political opportunists attempting to make the argument about whether or not Jordan Peterson should be allowed to dead name trans people. I mean, let's move on to some real important issues.
Well, Esperanza, again, I am sympathetic to that idea, but when you open by saying something along the lines of, your practice when you're organizing is to kind of affirm and then deflect to the more important subject, it seems to me it would be so much easier to get off this subject by acknowledging that while I might feel differently, I understand that someone who is very concerned about Twitter's ability to ethically police speech would not want them weighing in here, even though I substantively agree that people shouldn't be dead named on Twitter. But this is not something, the word allowed got really focused on in the exchange on Rising.
What is the problem with that? You're not allowed to call somebody by a name that they don't go by anymore. Big deal.
We shouldn't
no, it's not
be
crazy.
allowed. We shouldn't be not allowed to say what a person was for decades.
God forbid you not be allowed to call somebody by something they don't want to go by anymore because your right to call them what you want to call them.
If Donald Trump decided he just wanted to be called the greatest of all time, we would just move over to that and you'd be like, well, we got to respect his wishes.
It's not the same. Y'all continuously y'all are clearly invested in pretending like y'all don't understand the significance.
No,
of
I understand it.
And a dead name. So go ahead. I've already explained it.
All right. Well, we've had this one out. So,
and people were interpreting it different ways. And it seemed clear to me that Robby and Kim were using it in a very literal sense in terms of in this platform, what should be the policy? The same way that I would say in America, you should be allowed to do your KKK march without the police rounding you up and putting you in jail, because I think that we have free speech in this country, and that's a good thing. That doesn't mean I like that KKK does marches. That means that I don't like it doesn't mean I like a Nazi, but it is frustrating that, I mean, we are only here kind of running over this and over this and over this because there is and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like what you're saying is if you have this kind of speech-based approach to how a speech-based resistance to Jordan Peterson being banned or Trump being banned. I also was against Trump being banned from Twitter, let's say. I have no affinity for that guy. That it means that you are transphobic. And regardless of whether you see it as a slur, if you don't hate trans people.
I'm not afraid of trans people. You're gonna if it's gonna be right. I mean, if we're gonna use that word and say it's not a slur, well, then the word has meaning, right? And the meaning is being afraid of a certain group, having an what's the word? Like a not unrealistic, but not unnatural, but like it's a nonsensical, right?
I mean, that's the literal definition of the word, but we obviously don't use it to mean only a fear of, whatever group you're talking about. So again, I think that...
Then what does it mean?
Well, I think it clearly means a lot of people actually now use a different word, although I don't use it, to mean hatred instead of fear of, which is why you'll often hear me talk about trans misogyny rather than simply transphobia. But again, I think that you're not going to be able to control how people think of you. If activists think you're transphobic, you're not going to be able to control that. And just going on your platforms to complain about that is just pointless.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.